The question of religion, Sepideh said something about art and spirituality, but in the actual description of the talk, it is art and religion. And I think this is a good distinction because to start the conversation with, because I think a lot of people say things like, I believe in spirituality, but I'm not religious. Or they may say something like, I believe in a divine, or not a divine, I believe in the universe or an energy, but I don't believe in God. Or I'm not sure if I believe in God, but but I'm absolutely sure that I don't believe in religion. So the secularization or this idea that we live in a secular world, a secular just means a world that is sort of not imbued with religion. It's not imbued with the word of God per se. Apparently, it doesn't seem to be. So so I think this is a good place to start because the idea that we live in a world that has somehow moved away from superstition or moved away from these old myths. And I was actually listening to these people talking a little while ago about the philosopher Hobbes and comparing Hobbes and Rousseau. And basically, Hobbes had this idea of society that people were born into a very brutish, a very violent, a very kind of sort of like almost an oppressive, tyrannical kind of world. And nature was tyrannical and quite brutish, and that you just had to survive and control nature. And then if you could control nature, you would be safe. And then the Rousseauian idea is that no, nature is beautiful, nature is Edenic, nature is Eden, is perfect, and we have to get back to nature. And so these are two sort of conflicting views. And I actually think they're both, in some ways, I wouldn't say wrong, but I think there's something about both of them that needs to be sort of thought through. And the only thing I wanted to bring, and this is just off the top of my head, I haven't prepared any of this, but I was thinking about this idea of a secular world. I think if you look at culture over centuries and millennia, we've always been in this dialogue with nature. Our stories are rooted in nature. Like if you imagine how we functioned in the world, we were not separate. Like a tree was not, there was a group of people that live in Africa. They live on the edge of the Maasai people. They're a smaller group than the Maasai. They're a very tiny group. I can't remember exactly their name, but they're quite small. They're almost like pygmies, and the Maasai are really huge. But anyway, this group of people is one of the oldest sort of indigenous groups of people in the world. They've been living the way they've been living for a very long time. But anyway, when the women in that community give birth, they climb into this tree. And this tree is like those trees you see in animation where there's massive, massive trees, and they actually crawl right into the tree. And they're alone in there. There's no midwife, there's no doctor, there's no women, no men, but just the woman. And she gives birth in this tree. And then when she's ready, she comes out. So all of the people in the village are born in this tree. So what does that tell us about nature? The relationship of people with nature. It's always been sacred. So anyway, the question is, what is the role of art and in religion? And I think before we start with that, we have to ask ourselves, what is religion? We're not even getting to art, just what is religion? But before we even say what is religion, I think we have to go back further and say, well, what is God? And so I think we're in this interesting moment in time because I don't think we have a shared story or a shared language about God. Some people will say God is the unknowable essence. Some people will imagine God as a man with a beard, like the way Michelangelo painted him in the Sistine Chapel. Some may see God as, um, the force or the energy, or a judge, or a kind of a father. But these, from a Baha'i perspective, all of these, in a sense, are our imagination because we can't really know God directly. And so when we use a term that is primarily rooted in our imagination of something that we can't really know directly, it's bound to lead to all sorts of misunderstandings. But let's not think about it from the point of language right at the beginning. Let's just think about it in another way. And I'm going to share my screen in a second and show a couple of images. I don't have very many. It's too complicated to talk about art and religion and get into a bunch of art. Maybe this will be part one, and maybe I can do part two another time and get more into the art side of it, because there's a lot to discuss in the relationship between art and religion. But before we even get to that, I think we need to decide, do we believe that religion is real? Do we believe that it's vital and important, or is it superstition, prejudice, and oppressive? Anyway, so if we think about what is God, and you say, well, let's just take for argument's sake that you don't believe in God. It's a myth. Okay, it's just a fiction. Okay, fine. Let's put that on the table. So then let's look at nature for a second. What drives nature? What's the force behind it? So if you look at a blade of grass, it has this structure. It kind of looks like a little miniature sword. It kind of grows and it leans into the sun, and it accepts the light of the sun, and it follows this perfect pattern. And it's just a simple little blade of grass that just gets mowed over. Or think about a sunflower or a dandelion. Think of the structure, the complexity of a dandelion. So ask yourself, in your life, have you ever made something as beautiful and as perfect as a dandelion? Have you ever made something even one millionth as complex as a dandelion? So then if the answer is no, I've never made anything quite that complex that could grow from the ground and lean into the sun and change and transform into these little seed pods that sort of float out into the atmosphere. If you aren't able to create that, then why is it that you imagine there's nothing behind that when you see it in nature? Like, why wouldn't there be something driving that? So okay, there's a dandelion, and then think about a bird and the colors of the bird, the red color and the blue color and the green and the flight, the majesty. We were on the riverbank a few weeks ago and we saw a blue heron, and you're sort of looking at it, and at one point it outstretches its wings, and its wings are like 6 feet wide. It's a huge bird. So what we're supposed to imagine then is that this is just a random, completely meaningless, arbitrary occurrence, a blue heron. So for me, the secularization of the world, the thing that I don't like about it, the thing that makes me, that sort of gives me a certain degree of pain, is the lack of appreciation for the beauty of the design of that blue heron or that dandelion, because something is driving it. Forget the word God. There's a force in nature. And if you don't believe me, let's talk about it from the perspective of something a little bit different. So I'm sharing my screen. This is actually way better. I don't have to look at myself. So this is a painting I did many, many years ago. And the painting is actually called Cut Tree. And I'm posing the question to the group, is there a difference between a live tree and a dead tree? What's the difference? Imagine a tree lying on the ground like this one, cut. It's still a tree. It still has branches. It still has bark. It still has rings and corpuscles. But we know when we see a dead tree, don't we? I can see you, so you can nod if you agree, or turn your head if you disagree. So if you see a tree in nature cut down or rotting, you know that it's dead. Which means when it's growing and in full bloom, you know that it's alive. There's a difference between one and the other. So what is the life force in the tree? And the answer is nobody knows, but we know it's there and we know when it's not there. So there's something that animates the tree. And I'm going to call that something, I'm going to call that the spirit of, growth. Okay? But then if you imagine water flowing, or you imagine a star, or you imagine a flower, all of these are imbued with some other name. You know, the spirit of color, the spirit of light, the spirit of energy, of momentum, the spirit of like you see, sometimes I see these little squirrels and they move up the trees like almost at light speed. They're so fast with their furry tails. They have motion, they have movement, they have energy. And then I see dead squirrels all the time. They get hit by the car. There's a difference between the live one and the dead one. What's the difference? Spirit. So what is that spirit that's inside the tree, that's inside the sun? So why am I going on about this? The reason I'm going on about this is because if you don't believe in God, okay, fine. What is animating the tree? And then you could say the universe, okay? But here's the problem with that. You can create a cup or a pen or a car or a chair or a painting. You have the ability to create something. So in a sense, if the universe is mute and random and arbitrary, if the universe is just a random collection of carbon molecules, then you're superior to the universe because you have the power of imagination and rational thought. So here's my point. If we see within nature a complex, perfect, structured, patterned, ordered reality, then we know there has to be something that is ordering, that is moving, that is fashioning. So the creation itself is proof of a creator. The design is the proof of the designer. Okay, so whether or not we want to agree, here's another way of looking at it. If we look at ourselves as human beings, is there a faculty within us that allows us to imagine? Okay, and then the answer is yes. What can we imagine? Can we imagine technology? Can we imagine law? Can we imagine commerce, agriculture, literature, poetry, music, calculus, physics, medicine, biology? What can't we imagine? There's this faculty that allows us to explore the outermost depths of the universe and the innermost depths of the ocean. This faculty, it doesn't matter what you call it. The evidence is that what it does. It's like the evidence of the creation is the creation. And the evidence of the imagination is what we do with it, right? So the point that I'm making here is it doesn't matter if you call it a soul. The soul animates the human, and the evidence of that is the limitless array of things that emanate from our imagination, from the power of creativity, from the power of thought, from the power of meditation. So back to this question about God. Let's not worry about whether you believe in God or not. Let's try to understand if there's a life force in the universe. And we all know there is one. So the next question is the life force good? So if you're moving towards goodness, right? You're moving towards connection. You're moving towards harmony. You're moving towards beauty. What if you're moving away from have you ever moved away from those things? What did that feel like? What does it feel like when you move towards the ego, towards aggression, towards violence, towards lust, towards vengeance, towards resentfulness, towards pain, towards oblivion? I walked by the road yesterday, and I saw a guy who was doing heroin, and he was so out that I thought maybe he was dead because he was laying so deeply deep that it looked like a corpse. And I thought to myself, what should I do? And then I noticed he was kind of, I could tell he was moving a little bit, but the point is, he was moving towards a different feeling. What's the feeling when you take heroin? And don't say you don't know, because anybody that's gone under anesthesia, like at the hospital or something, has undergone some deep sedation, has a feeling. And what is it? What's the feeling? It's oblivion. It's sedation. It's sleep. It's put me out of my misery, right? So if we can move in that direction, we can also move towards a different direction. So what's this other direction that I'm talking about? And it exists in nature. So the point that I'm making is there is something within nature that is ordered, that is structured. And you know when you're moving towards the truth because the relationships are stronger. Your words are meaningful. Your actions feel like they have relevance. When you feel connected. You know what they were saying? This philosopher, this clinician, physician Gabor Mate, he talks a lot about addiction. He says the opposite of drug abuse, like the opposite of being in a state of addiction, is community and connectedness. When you're in the throes of addiction, you're completely alone. You're cut off. You're totally in your own little world. And when you're moving towards something truthful, you're actually, you know it because you're moving towards connection, towards community, towards family, towards your children, towards your loved ones. Those bonds are getting stronger. So there is a principle in the Baha'i faith that says one of the proofs, okay, I'm paraphrasing, but one of the proofs that God imbues nature with meaning is the concept of beauty. And there's a passage from the writings of Baha'u'llah that says, "This is that most great beauty foretold in the books of the messengers, through whom truth shall be distinguished from error." And this is a very mysterious phrase because he's saying it's the beauty that distinguishes falsity and error from the truth. So imagine nature again. When we look at nature, when we see the order, when we see the perfection, we're seeing beauty. When you see a child, for example, a little newborn baby, you can't help but recognize the beauty, the symmetry, the balance. He says, the beauty will guide us towards the truth. He says, guiding the lovers to the seat of sanctity and to this resplendent beauty. So this revelation, this word of God is guiding who? It's guiding the lovers. And what is love? Love is connection. Love is unity. Love is moving towards cohesion. It's guiding the lovers. Where? To the seat of sanctity. So what is sanctity? It is something sanctified. It's clean. It's pure. It's beautiful. Guiding the lovers to the seat of sanctity and to this resplendent beauty. Another beautiful word, resplendent. What does it mean to be resplendent? It means like glowing, glorious, inspiring, uplifting. And then he says, this is that most great beauty foretold in the books of the messengers. So who are the messengers? And what were they talking about? And Baha'u'llah says, this is what they were talking about. And its evidence is beauty. So when you want to know about the role of art and religion, it's beauty. That's what it is. We'll come back to that. So this is some art, in a sense. This is a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins. One of the manifestations of the spirit that I talked about before, one of the manifestations of the faculty of the imagination is language. It's maybe in some ways the most powerful tool that we have is words, language. So poetry is very, very, very vital to our understanding. And I thought this poem summed up very nicely this concept of a force within nature that shows us that the divine is the animating principle. So he says, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil, crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, have trod, have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights of the black west went, oh morning, at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. What a fantastic poem. So, is there a God? Well, is there nature? Yep, there's nature. Is nature beautiful? Yes, beauty is a sign of the Creator. And I don't know how it's even a question, because it seems so, this poem strikes so clearly at that idea of nature being deeply embedded and infused in the grandeur of God. I love this. It'll flame out like shining from shook foil. You know what foil looks like. Imagine tin foil, and you shake it in the sun. What would it look like? The rays going in a million different directions. And then for all of this beauty, for all of this commerce, for all of this bloodshed and war, for all of this, lives being raised up and lives being brought low, people being born, people dying, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness, deep down things. That's the blade of grass that I'm talking about. No matter how dark, no matter how depressing, no matter how alienated a person can feel, you can see the next day a little shoot of green grass grows up, and the dandelions and the robins and the worms. Like nature is this force is completely limitless. That doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to be stewards. Okay, so we're asking the question: what is the relationship between religion and art? So this is my first point. It's intrinsically important to understand the question of God, and the question of how do we relate to God in what's the evidence of the creative or the divine? And so one of the things I would say about art is poetry. Because poetry will also be, or not just poetry, but literature and words give us the tools to explore our relationship to the world around us. So one sort of, in a sense, proof would be nature, but the greater proof is mankind. Mankind is the proof of this creative spirit. So this is a hidden word from the writings of Baha'u'llah. O Son of Spirit, I created thee rich. Why dost thou bring thyself down to poverty? Noble I made thee. Wherewith dost thou base thyself? Out of the essence of knowledge I gave thee being. Why seekest thou enlightenment from anyone beside me? Out of the clay of love I molded thee. How dost thou busy thyself with another? Turn thy sight unto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee, mighty, powerful, and self-subsisting. So we can look to nature, but we can also look within. And Baha'u'llah is saying, actually, if you look within, you will find the divine in you, inside of you. Now, this painting is a bit of an odd one, but I thought I would show it in relationship to poverty. You know, this quote, it says, "Why dost thou bring thyself down to poverty? I made thee, noble I made thee. Why dost thou base thyself?" So in this painting, I'll show you the source for it in a second, but it kind of reminded me of those homeless guys who haven't had a shaved or combed their hair in years. So on one hand, it's kind of like an image that I would see of someone who was on, didn't have a place to live, or didn't have a home, or didn't have a family, was on kind of on his own out on the street. And his eyes are kind of like that glazed over, there's a little bit of this idea of like zoning out. But on another hand, this was actually the source of that image, where the sculptures on the side of Chartres Cathedral in France, and actually images of the saints and the holy ones. So I thought one of the things I was talking about here was sometimes when we see somebody who is in a state of poverty, there's a feeling of kind of like, I don't know, like you, in your heart you want to be compassionate, but you also are kind of pushing that person aside. So for me, this was an image of both. It was sort of like, it could be a homeless guy, but it could also be a saint. And it's that idea of you have this nobility, you have this spirit that, I'll just leave it on here for a second, that even in the depths of despair, and even alone and cut off from your family, cut off from your community, completely absorbed in a kind of in your own suffering, there's this spirit. And that was sort of what that painting was about. But this idea of turning inward, what does that actually mean, to turn inward? What does it mean to see God standing, or see the Creator, the divine light within us? And I think that this now brings us to a new dimension, which is, yes, nature is educating us. Yes, nature is showing us this fused kind of not fused, but this what's the word that he used? There's this beauty, this freshness, deep down things. But if this Creator that I'm talking about, the divine, isn't just an arbitrary, random collection of, events. If the creative spirit is conscious, then would it guide its creation? And the religious tradition says, yes, God guides humanity always. So how does God, the unknowable, guide humanity? And the answer is through the Word. There is that quote in John that says, in the beginning, right? You know that quote. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's such a powerful sentence. You could study that sentence for years and years and never ever get to unravel it totally. In the beginning was the Word. But this is really the spirit of the religious kind of impulse is that the revelation is cloaked in the word. So who delivers the word? And it's the manifestations of God that deliver this word. So first of all, we have to recognize there is a God. And second of all, we have to recognize that that divine creative, the great spirit, is guiding humanity. And thirdly, we have to recognize that the most powerful tool that God uses to guide humanity is the word. And who delivers the word? Jesus and Muhammad. And just like I said before, that the proof of the soul was the evidence that comes from your imagination, like science and biology and music and literature and poetry and art, all of it. Well, the proof of Muhammad's, the power of Muhammad's revelation is the influence that Muhammad's teachings had on humanity. And the same with Jesus, and the same with Moses. But in this age, this is the culmination, this is the coming together of all of these different teachings in the person of Baha'u'llah. So this is what he writes about his word. Now, if we were sharing, like in a true Baha'i meeting, everybody would take turns reading these, but it's kind of complicated. But I don't think it's that complicated. Can someone just sort of unmute themselves or someone read that and I can unmute them? No? Okay. Go ahead.
Do you want me to do it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd love for you to do it. Can you see it okay on the screen?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, not now. Now I can.
You can't see it anymore?
No, it's good. It's good now.
Okay.
Every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God is endowed with such potency as can instill life into every human frame. All the wondrous works ye behold in this world have been manifested through the operation of his supreme and most exalted will, his wondrous and inflexible purpose. No sooner is this resplendent word uttered than its animating energies, stirring within all created things, give birth to the means and instruments whereby such arts can be produced and perfected. In the days to come, ye will verily behold things of which ye have never heard before. Every single letter proceeding out of the mouth of God is indeed a mother letter, and every word uttered by him who is the wellspring of divine revelation is a mother word.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's wonderful to hear somebody else read that, and especially you. Um, I love this passage so much. Um, everything about this passage. So let's just take it apart a little bit. Every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God, every word is endowed with such potency as can instill new life into every human frame. Now, when we talk about being born again, when we talk about change, and even Jesus, there's a passage, I may or may not be quoting this correctly, but he basically says, why is baptism so important if you just went off and continued on doing terrible things? So being baptized only matters if your heart is changed. And if your heart is changed, you are baptized in a sense. So baptism in the Christian sense is this idea of rebirth, right? But what gives the power to, so if you imagine a person that's like, I'll imagine myself for a minute, back when I was a lot younger and full of rage and full of resentment and full of anger and like looking for ways to lash out at the world, looking for ways to get back at the world for putting me in a place where I was suffering, right? So what is the power that can take that resentment and anger and transmute it into peace and love? And that power is infinitely more powerful than the power of the state, the power of the residential schools, the power of the penitentiaries, the power of the institutions that guide our lives. Imagine the power to change someone from resentment and anger and violence to peace and to love. So Baha'u'llah is saying that power is in my words. And when he says my words, he means God's words as coming through the manifestations, coming from Buddha, coming from Krishna, coming from Zoroaster, coming from Moses, coming from His Holiness the Bab. The revelation has this power. And you know how you can see it? You know it's true because you can see it. You will meet people who have felt that power and changed. Okay, so it has this power to instill new life, which is the most great power if you think about it. But then furthermore, all the wondrous works you behold in the world are brought forward through the operation of His supreme and most exalted will, His wondrous and inflexible purpose. And even furthermore, no sooner is this word, this resplendent word uttered, than its animating energies stirring within all created things give birth to the means and instruments whereby such arts can be produced. So it's not just the heart that changes, it's not just the inspiration that occurs, but even the instruments by which such arts can be produced and perfected are a result of this word. And it says, in the days to come, you will see things that you could never imagine. And aren't we seeing that day in and day out? Okay, so just to summarize, I'm starting off by saying, what is God? And I'm saying whether you want to call it God or just call it the universe or nature, you see the divine flowing through everything. Is that divine will benevolent, kind, and loving? Yes. And how do you know? Because of the beauty and the order. I guess at this point I could just say, what about suffering, right? What about all the wars and disease and stuff like that? And in a sense, that's another topic. But my argument for that would simply be most of the suffering that humanity endures is as a result of our own will, our own anger, our own ego. We are born quite pure, but we're also born with a lot of selfish kind of tendencies. So without going down that whole path, I would say even war and violence, in a sense, is an emanation of the imagination. It's just it's moving in the direction of incoherence and chaos rather in the direction of order and beauty. Anyway, now I'm not. We won't go too deeply into this, but I wanted to say that this word, the word of God, is first of all, the evidence of the word of God is in our own relationship to it. The greatest proof is the word itself and the impact that it has on us. But this word is very, I mean, this concept of revelation is really at the heart of what it means for me, what it means to be a Baha'i. What is our relationship to the word? And I thought this quote also goes even deeper into that, or not deeper, but opens up another facet of it. He says, "O my servants, could ye apprehend with what wonders of munificence and bounty I have willed to entrust your souls?" So before I go on, the word munificence, do you know what that word means? It means such generosity, like a gift that's so beyond what you deserve that it's almost embarrassing. Like someone says, "I got a gift for you," but instead of giving you like a Twinkies or a cup of coffee, they give you like the keys to the kingdom. Like munificence is generosity beyond anything that you deserve. Okay, so if you could apprehend with what wonders of my munificence and bounty I have willed to entrust your souls, you would of a truth rid yourselves of attachment to all created things. and would gain a true knowledge of your own selves. So this is that idea of looking within you, seeing the divine within you, a knowledge which is the same as the comprehension of mine own being. You would find yourselves independent of all else but me, and would perceive with your inner and outer eye, and as manifest as the revelation of my effulgent name, the seas of my loving kindness and bounty moving within you. Okay, so the seas of his loving kindness, the oceans moving within us. What would prevent us from seeing that? What would block us from seeing that? He says, suffer not your idle fancies, your imagination, the things that you construct with your ego, your evil passions, your insincerity and blindness of heart, to dim the luster or stain the sanctity of so lofty a station. Ye are even as the bird which soareth with the full force of its mighty wings, and with complete and joyous confidence through the immensity of the heavens, until impelled to satisfy its hunger, it turneth longingly to the water and clay of the earth below it. And having been entrapped in the mesh of its desire, find itself impotent to resume its flight to the realms whence it came. Powerless to shake off the burden weighing on its sullied wings, that bird, hitherto an inmate of the heavens, is now forced to seek a dwelling place upon the dust. Wherefore, O my servants, defile not your wings with the clay of waywardness and vain desires, and suffer them not to be stained with the dust of envy and hate, that ye may not be hindered from soaring in the heavens of my divine knowledge. So really, that's the answer to this question. Where is God? What is God? What is the divine? Well, he says, you will be immersed in the divine knowledge just by freeing yourselves from the fetters of materialism and selfishness and violence and resentment. All right. The last thing I'm going to add before kind of summarizing with looking at a couple of paintings is that if you come across these claims that Baha'u'llah is making, or if you hear about the Baha'i faith and you think, well, that's interesting. I like this idea of unity. I like this idea of peace, equality of men and women, the equality of religion, the progressiveness of revelation, the progressiveness of religion. I think you also have to ask yourself, who's making this claim? You know, who's bringing this forward? Is it Jesus? Is it Muhammad? It's Baha'u'llah. And what is his claim? And he says, these are his words. He says, verily I say, this is the day in which mankind can behold the face and hear the voice of the promised one. The call of God hath been raised, and the light of his countenance hath been lifted up upon men. That's the day. And then you could go a little bit further if you wanted to, and you would ask yourself, well, what would it have been like in the day of Jesus? Did he raise a call? When he came, was it the day of God? And the answer is yes. And so how would you have reacted? Put yourself back in 2,000 years ago. Who was Jesus? He was, I think the people thought Jesus, I don't think people knew about this idea of the virgin birth because Joseph was protecting Mary, right? And Joseph said, I believe you that you're a virgin. Imagine, Joseph was like, I believe you. And I will claim Jesus as my son. It's very interesting though, because at that time, adultery and having a child outside of being married was punishable by death. And the way they would kill you is by stoning you to death. So Joseph believed Mary and he protected Jesus. But Joseph was quite a simple man, and Jesus grew up to become a carpenter. But when he was 14, they were visiting Jerusalem, I believe, and Jesus went into one of the synagogues at 14 years old. Imagine that, this little, not little, but young carpenter son from Nazareth walks into a synagogue with the rabbis and the power, and he begins to communicate, begins to talk. And all of the rabbis in the synagogue said, "Whoa, what's this? What's going on?" Okay? Anyway, we're not going to do a whole story about the life of Jesus, but other than to say his power and his radiance was clear even from the time when he was a young boy. But would you have recognized Jesus when he walked up to you in the street? And the answer is probably not, because nobody did. They almost all rejected him. And I was thinking about this again recently, about what is it like to crucify somebody? I mean, to nail somebody to something is such a violent and ruthless thing to do. Anyway, this is how they treated him. So if you think you were so special, think again. Maybe you were. Maybe you would have been like Peter or like John or any of the disciples, but most people were not. And in the time of Muhammad, they called him an imposter and they mocked him, and they said, "You're just making this. You're not making it. You're just copying this stuff." Anyway, the point is, in the time of Baha'u'llah, the only thing I want to say, because this is a fireside, it's a public, opportunity to speak these things publicly. In the time of Baha'u'llah, who was this figure? And historically, it's very interesting. His father was one of the highest members of the court of Fath Ali Shah, who was the Shah, famous Shah, powerful king of Persia. And his father was the minister of the treasury. That was Baha'u'llah's father. So he came from royalty. He came from wealth, and not only that, in the court of the king, they loved Baha'u'llah, just like Jesus. When he went to the synagogue, Baha'u'llah went into the court, and when he spoke, all of the ministers of the court said, "This child is special. He's absolutely, inspired." So how did humanity react when Baha'u'llah began to proclaim this new revelation? And just for those of you who don't know, and I know there's an audience live right now, but there's also another audience, which is what happens after the fact when you post this on YouTube. For those of you who don't know, the way they treated, first of all, when he went back to his home province of Nur, he began to proclaim this new revelation to his family. And imagine, Baha'u'llah was very well respected, but he wasn't a religious figure. He was a royal nobleman. He wore the hat of a nobleman, not a turban. He wasn't a mullah. He wasn't a priest. So he came in and he began to teach. And so many of his family embraced this new cause. Anyway, one thing led to another, and the state was like, "We are putting an end to this, and we're going to put an end to it now." So they took Baha'u'llah, and they took his headdress off and his shoes, and he had to walk something like 15 miles behind a horse in the sun. And then they threw him into a dungeon. And the dungeon is known as the Sia Chal, but basically it was a well, it was a disused reservoir where they would hold water, and there was no water. They had removed the water, so imagine just a dank pit with about 150 other people. And the purpose of putting you in there was to kill you slowly through disease and pestilence, and just through sheer trauma. After a few days, people would die. But anyway, Baha'u'llah was put in there for 4 months. So that's how he was treated. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, what is this role of religion in art? Well, first of all, you have to say, well, what is religion? You have to ask yourself that. And the next question you have to ask yourself is religion a vital and important aspect of humanity? And what Baha'is will tell you is yes, It is, because it's constantly being renewed, and in this age it's being renewed again in the writings and the teachings of Baha'u'llah. What is the role of religion and art? Well, on one hand, I think art trains us to think about our relationship to the divine. That's why I read that poem. It also, art trains us to look at the world, through the eyes, in a sense, almost like a child. I'm just going to show you three paintings, and then I'll end. This is a painting of a mountain, and one of the things that I was trying to explore here was the idea that the mountain isn't just, in a sense, an image of a mountain, but it's also an opportunity for the language of painting to sort of revel and frolic and get lost in the language of a mountain. So a facet that could be, just a face of rock becomes an opportunity for light. It becomes an opportunity for drama, for ultimately within painting, what you're trying to do is create relationships, light to dark. You're trying to create relationships that look meaningful. They look like they belong with one another. So this idea of a mountain is something very static, very stable, very kind of, extremely still. But a painting, which is also is a surface, like a mountain in a sense is like a surface, but the surface of painting is very active. So there's this kind of interesting play between motion and stillness, between light and dark, between movement. So using the mountain as a kind of an arena for creating movement. If you want to talk about religion, you can actually start thinking about metaphors of mountains. But really, as a painter, I'm not really thinking about metaphor very much when I'm in the midst of it. I'm just trying to put one thing against the other. I was thinking about this a couple of days ago too. You know that feeling, I don't know if you've had this feeling, but when you're 5 years old or 4 years old and your mom or your dad puts some paints in front of you and you're at the table and you just start moving them around. Do you remember that feeling? And you're just like, you put the sun here and you put the house here and you put the tree here and you're just completely having fun. Well, that's what it's like to be a painter. That's what my life is like. When I go to the studio and things start happening, it's exactly that same feeling of the 5-year-old just reveling in the creative process. It's very much it's very much playing with your spirit. You're at play with your own imagination. That creative energy, when you're in it, is very addictive. It's very just a sec, Martha. Anyway, so this one is called the Black Sea, and it's the same thing as the mountain. It's just little facets, right? Little diamonds and little triangles. So the surface of the painting is extremely flat, is extremely, dead in a way, but then there's all this motion, there's all this movement. So this is a painting that explores the idea of, and maybe in some ways the idea of death, right? Because at the end of that horizon is that blackness, and it gives us a chance, as artists, but I guess as viewers too, to contemplate like that movement, that movement towards a horizon, the movement out to sea. And again, I think that's part of the role of art in relation to metaphor, is making it concrete, making it kind of physical. And the last painting I'm going to show, like I'm not showing very much, this is it, is a painting that I did recently that was inspired by the artist Edvard Munch, who's a Norwegian painter who is really one of my heroes. And Edvard Munch was born in 1844 and died in 1963, I believe. So interesting time that he lived. Anyway, so this painting is kind of about light, and about that blinding kind of the blinding light of the divine in a way, like looking right at it, trying to look at it. Um, and you talk about the role of religion again. I don't think Munch was a religious person per se, but he was extremely well. Maybe he was extremely. He was deeply connected to the idea of God. So was Van Gogh. If you really want to explore the religion and art, look at Van Gogh. Because Van Gogh, all of Van Gogh's paintings were just like this, almost crying out for God to accept him, to say, is this painting good enough? Is this paint, like he was always trying to reflect the glory of God. Van Gogh, he was extremely devout in his way. Anyway, so with this painting, what I was opening up was this relationship between um, myself and this source of light, and trying to make a painting about that relationship. And without getting sentimental or overly, revealing too much about myself, when I realized that that's what this painting was about, I just started crying when I was making it. I was so happy because for a long time I was just looking at Munch. But then when I realized halfway through the painting that it was a painting about my relationship to Baha'u'llah, and it made me cry, as I thought, wow, how wonderful to be making a painting about my relationship to my Lord. Unequivocal. So with that, I'll end it. And I don't know if there's time or people want to have questions or whatever, but